Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study with Second Baptist Church located in South Hadley, Massachusetts. We're so grateful for each one of you that has decided to join us tonight as we continue our journey through the book of Ecclesiastes. It's a book not many people are very familiar with, but we're almost done. We have tonight's study. We'll wrap things up next Wednesday, and we'll have gone through the whole biblical book of Ecclesiastes. Now, as people are coming in, just want to point out that tonight we're covering 3 chapters, and we're going to focus particularly on just a couple themes because we've treated a lot of the topics before. And if I had to sum it all up, the last 3 chapters that we're going to be covering, it's live wisely to live well and to avoid burnout. So if you're wanting to live wisely to live well and avoid burnout, then this study's for you. All right, well, hopefully all that are joining us live have joined us live. So let's open our time in prayer. Join with me, please. Dear God, we put this time into your hands and ask for your work in our hearts and in our lives, that you would draw us close to yourself. That, Lord, wherever we are at, in the Pioneer Valley or even across the globe, Lord, that you would use this time. Your Spirit would fill us. You'd give us the wisdom we need to follow you wisely, to live wisely, and to live well. Lord, we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, well, let's open our Bibles to Ecclesiastes chapter, where, again, we have 2 more Wednesdays, tonight and next Wednesday. Next Wednesday, we're going to wrap up and focus on the final verses in chapter 12. Ecclesiastes only has 12 chapters. But today, we're looking at chapters 10, 11, and 12. And the reason I'm doing that is that a lot of the themes in those last chapters are themes we've already dealt with in previous studies. So they're just sort of reiterating, reinforcing those. And then also, there's a lot of different proverbs, different material that are kind of just put together in those last chapters. So it's really hard to find a cohesive theme. And I know for maybe some of you, you're thinking, well, I'm kind of glad to be done with Ecclesiastes because it can be a downer. All the talk, one of the themes of Ecclesiastes is the futility of life, the inevitability of death, and because of that, all of life can be vain apart from God. And sometimes maybe after our studies, you just want to go watch reruns of Mr. Rogers or Bob Ross paintings, Happy Clouds. Because just to make yourself feel better. But this book of Ecclesiastes, it has value. It has an important part in the canon of Scripture and in the wisdom literature. It reflects the harsh realities of life without God, and it really pushes us to that place. And that's important because we all go down that path every now and again, where whether it's in our mind or in our lives, where we live apart from God, and then that futility of life apart from him really collapses down upon us. And the book of Ecclesiastes pushes us in that direction, not so that we'll despair, but so that we'll live wisely and turn to God and not just the vain things of life. And so I really like how the book of Ecclesiastes just says it like it is, doesn't sugarcoat anything. I like that. And we need a reality check every now and again, don't we? Because sometimes there isn't just all happy trees and stuff like that. And not everything's unicorn and rainbows, right? Sometimes things are harsh. And I know you're probably wondering, where's the unicorn? Well, today I have an elephant. But Robert Plant, he's always got my back. And he's helping us in this study. So the last 3 chapters of Ecclesiastes has various wisdom sayings, and some of them aren't that related, and again, it reiterates some of these things. But so today, I'm just going to highlight one of the many themes in this last chapter. And I said that earlier. The theme I really want to look at today, by patching a few of these verses together, is live wisely in order to live well and avoid burnout. Now, because Ecclesiastes is a wisdom book, it addresses both practical and philosophical wisdom. So it's like the book of Proverbs. The book of Proverbs gives us advice for living, right? Like there's a proverb that talks about, don't take a loan with high interest. It's very practical wisdom literature. And in the book of Ecclesiastes, in chapters 10 through 12, we have some more of those proverbs, several proverbs, which is not surprising because it's a part of the wisdom literature, but it is surprising in that that's not really what the writer of Ecclesiastes had been doing to this point. But if we were to follow some of this wisdom here in the book of Ecclesiastes, we would not suffer burnout and exhaustion as often as we do. So any of you listening out there, ever gotten burnt out or close to burnout, ever exhausted at the end of a week, where you're just physically, you're mentally exhausted, so you kind of just don't want to do anything? And sometimes that can last just a day, sometimes it's weeks, and just you're spent. Well, Ecclesiastes gives us some wisdom for living so that to prevent burnout. And so let's look. In particular, so, normally I kind of read through the whole chapter, but there's too much of that, so I'm just going to highlight and read particular verses. So look at Ecclesiastes chapter 10, verses 10 and 11. Okay, so Ecclesiastes 10, verses 10 and 11. Again, I'm sort of choosing different verses and really digging down on them because they're proverbs. Chapter 10, verse 10. If the iron, or maybe some of your translations will say axe, if your axe is blunt and one does not sharpen the edge, he must use more strength. But wisdom helps one to succeed. If the serpent bites before it's charmed, there is no advantage to the charmer. Right, so I think one of these things that this proverb, these verses highlight is that working harder can just make you more tired if it's not coupled with wisdom. That there's a certain wisdom and skill to actually having success. It's not just about trying harder. So, for instance, when it talks about, if the serpent bites before it's charmed, there's no advantage to the charmer. That if it's not about working harder, it's about working better. That if the snake charmer doesn't really know what he's doing before he even starts his work, he'll be bitten. Now, I really wanted to do a demonstration with that, but I don't think there's any snake charmers in our church. There's some charmers, but not snake charmers. So maybe the other example will be more relatable, that of sharpening an axe. It says, if the axe is blunt and one does not sharpen the edge, he must use more strength. Have you ever tried to cut down a tree with a dull axe or a dull chainsaw even? Or have you ever tried to cut a roast with a dull knife? You know that you put a whole lot of work into it, but it's not very effective. That's what this proverb is saying, is that by using wisdom, you work wiser, not harder. That if you sharpen the axe, the tree gets cut much easier. If you sharpen the knife, the roast gets cut quicker. Otherwise, you're struggling, you're exerting more energy with less results. And that's frustrating. That's exhausting. And this principle of sharpening the axe, it really applies to all of life. Instead of trying harder, it's often wiser to step back and ask, all right, what's the best way to do this task? Is there a way that I can sharpen the axe so that, again, instead of working harder, I'm working easier, I'm working better? I've known several people who wanted to make a decent living without having to work 60 hours of grinding work a week just to make ends meet. So they stop, sharpen the saw by going to school or getting training for a couple of years, so that then they work wiser, not harder. That's a way of sharpening the axe. Another example is, my fellow men out there, if we would just stop and read the directions of how to put together the IKEA furniture or whatever, instead of messing around for hours trying to figure out how does this go together, but I'm not going to look at the instructions, we would have it done in less time and less frustration. I know it goes against our man nature to read the directions, but if we would stop, read the directions, take time to sharpen the saw by looking and making sure we have all the parts, all of that, it would lead to much less frustration. Another way to sharpen the axe is to sit down. at the beginning of every week and make a plan for that week. When you organize ahead of time, what you're doing is you're saying, all right, I'm going to make a plan for my week. Although it takes time to sit down and make a plan, in the long run, it saves time. Otherwise, you can be running around at the end of the week trying to get all the things you were supposed to get done that you kind of forgot about and didn't plan for. When, again, if you had just taken time at the beginning of your week to sharpen your axe, you would have cut through that week. You'd have been more sharper. You'd have been more effective. And I know what you might be thinking, all right, is this a time management seminar or is this Bible study? Well, it's a biblical concept. It's a wisdom concept. And Proverbs and the wisdom literature has a lot of that kind of how to live wisely to be more effective. And in this case, it's important to not just live with less frustration and live without mental burnout. It's important to live effectively for God as well. So it's not just about you being more effective with your day in your life. It's about being more effective for God too. And if God is important to you, then this concept also applies on a spiritual plane. You need to sharpen your spiritual tools. Set aside time to read the Word, to pray, to fellowship, because God fills us with His Spirit. We need His Spirit, but we need to also make ourselves available. So it's like a two-sided coin, is that God is sovereign. He's going to do what He's going to do. Jesus says in John chapter 3, comparing the Spirit to the wind. It blows where it wants, and no one knows when it's coming, when it's going. It's talking about the wind. He says, so it is with the Spirit. So we don't control the Spirit. The Spirit controls us, but we put ourselves in the path of the Spirit. But if we don't intentionally seek to sharpen our spiritual tools, then we're going to miss out on a power greater than ourselves. So that instead of just trying to live wisely in our own strength, well, we have more than that. God has given us His Spirit so that we can, again, have that strength, that wisdom, the guidance, the abilities beyond ourselves. But if we don't stop and put ourselves in the path of the Spirit, if our week fills up, it fills up with all the different tasks we need to do and it crowds out God's stuff, then we're going to end up experiencing spiritual dryness, spiritual dullness and frustration. And you can get to a point where you feel apart from God. And that eventually can lead to spiritual burnout or spiritual dryness, where instead of God filling you up to do those tasks you want to do, what you end up becoming is a functional atheist. What do I mean by a functional atheist? Is that you're not an atheist you believe in God, but when you look at how you live your life and how you live your day, you're actually living as if you don't have the Spirit of God. You're not living with God's perspective, with His power or His presence. You're living like you're functioning like an atheist. And that's not why God has called us to Himself. That's not why Christ has died for us. He didn't die for us so that we would live the same as a non-believer. No, He died for us so that we would be free from sin and we would be forgiven to live as children of God. And when we live as children of God, then we mimic God, that we have His strength. We are filled with His Spirit. And in order to put ourselves in that place, in order to keep from being functional atheists, oftentimes we need to sharpen our spiritual saw, meaning we have to be intentional. Beginning of the week, set aside time and take that time to not just do the spiritual tasks, not just do the ministry tasks or the work for God, but actually to connect with God and receive His sharpening, so that we're not spiritually dull, and therefore we're more effective, and we're more effective beyond ourselves. And that comes, again, as Jesus makes us His children. And so if you have never received Christ, if you've never trusted in Christ's sacrifice on your behalf, then that's what you need to do. That's the wise way of living, where you can be fully forgiven and brought into a being as a child of God. And then you receive the Spirit and you receive all that God has, and you live in newness of life. And that's the true wise way. So I urge you, if you've never done that, to do that tonight. But for those who have trusted in Christ and had a new lease on life, we still have to take that time to sharpen our spiritual acts, to connect with God so that we're filled with the Spirit, so that we're actually walking in the truth of who we are and not walking as functional atheists. Because again, it's a two-sided coin. God's the one who regenerates. God's the one who pours out his Spirit. And so it's all about his initiative. But yet we have to put ourselves in that place to receive all that he has. So they go together, God's work and our work. So as we look at back to Ecclesiastes, I think one of the precepts here is, why not? Why not take time to sharpen that spiritual axe and do that by planning ahead of time. You say, all right, Sunday, I'm going to worship the Lord. I'm going to fellowship, and I'm not going to schedule anything else on Sunday morning. Or every morning, I'm going to plan on reading the Word 30 minutes. 30 minutes of Bible reading. I'm not going to plan anything else. That's the time I'm doing this. Because if you don't set aside time ahead of time, spiritually speaking, you're going to be trying to cut down cut down a tree with a dull axe. An axe is dull as a hammer. That's why we need to spiritually sharpen our saws. And if you think about that, I don't know if you've ever tried to cut down a tree with a dull axe. I've had it when I was a kid, especially, or dull chainsaw. It's frustrating, and you want to give up because again, you're doing all of this work, but with little results. And so this applies spiritually, and it also applies to anything in life. And so for me, I know when my kids were little, a part of my calling was to be a husband and father, so I'd set aside Saturdays for family stuff. Now they all have their own thing they're doing, but I still try to have Saturdays with my wife. But trying to be intentional and setting that time aside so it doesn't get filled in. Certainly things will come up, but if you sharpen your axe ahead of time by planning, you'll do those things you need to do, and you'll be more likely to spiritually prosper. Now, for maximum spiritual effectiveness, this type of sharpening the axe, this planning I'm talking about, where you're planning out your week, you're planning out your day, it should be done with God. So on Sunday nights or Monday mornings, I'll often sit with my calendar and ask God, what do I need to do this week? And it's amazing what seems important or what seems unimportant. It changes when we bring those things before God and we get God's eternal perspective on the week. So this time of planning, it's not just you, again, thinking stuff up, but it's more effective, it's more focused when we are actively engaging God in that process. And if that's the case, then we're much less likely to fatigue, we're much less likely to burn out, because we're going to be in step with God, in step with his Spirit. We're not just going to be effective in a worldly sense, in a wise living way, but also in a spiritual sense. We'll be sharp on both levels. And now, so the time for that kind of sharpening the saw is at the beginning of the process, not the end. When we're already worn out, when the week is almost over, so it's Friday, it's hard to then have maximum effectiveness in life. And I think this principle is contained in Ecclesiastes 12, verse 1, actually through 7. It says this. It says, "Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them." So again, remember the Creator in the days of your youth before the evil days come. Here, it's saying, no, sharpen your saw. Remember God before, while things are early, not at the end, because at the end you've already used up a whole mess of time. And then what's interesting is in the rest of those verses, verse 2, it has a whole long list of things that you should do beforehand, right? So remember God in your youth, before the evil days come and your years draw to a close. And then verse 2, before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened, the clouds return after the rain, and the day when the keepers of the house tremble, and the strong men are bent, and the grinders cease because they are few, and those who look through the window are dimmed, and the doors on the street are shut, when the sound of grinding is low, and one rises up at the sound of a bird, and all the daughters of song are brought low. They are afraid also of what is high, and terrors are in the way. Before the almond tree blossoms, the grasshopper drags itself along, and desire fails, because man is going to his eternal home, and the mourners go about the streets. Verse 6, before the silver cord is snapped, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher is shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the cistern, and the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. So I just read a whole lot of stuff, and it might have all jumbled up, but the pattern in all of those is that remember your Creator before any of that. That before all of those things end, right? Remember your Creator. That's really the thrust of that. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth. Remember your Creator before all of that stuff comes to an end. And when it says remember your Creator, it's not just remember like Pepperidge Farms remembers, as in information. Like, oh yeah, I remember God. Remember also has that connotation here of remember enough so that you follow it. Remember, regard it so that it affects your living. That's really the thrust here. Remember your Creator before, the days are over, before all of this stuff. Again, it goes back to sharpening the saw. If you are going to be sharp, if you're going to live wisely and avoid burnout, it's best to engage God and do those things early in the process, not at the end when you're scrambling around and you've wasted a lot of time. And here it specifically talks about not waiting till you're old to make God a part of your life. But remember Him when you're young and you have lots of energy and many years ahead, that you can effectively even longer make an impact for God. Now, this isn't to say that older people shouldn't follow God, but that it's better to follow God all of your life than just the end of it. But of course, wherever you're at, it's best to begin your day, begin your week, whether you're 4, 40, or 80. Begin your week, begin your day while the day's young, remembering God, trying to follow Him. And again, this concept can be applied more broadly, whether it's the beginning of the week, the beginning of the month, beginning of a life. It's better to remember God. It's better to get His input at the beginning of the process, before you're tired, before you're worn out, before the day is almost over. Too many people go to God only after they're burnt out, not when the day is young, not when the task that they're doing is early in that process, but at the end, when they're frustrated, when they're burnt out, when all the delight in life is lost, then sometimes we go to God. But then oftentimes we're so burnt out we can't actually receive all that He has. Better to go to Him early, before the exhaustion, while you still have energy to figure out, how am I going to stay sharp for the Lord, before you can go early when you can still redeem the time. And maybe you've experienced this before. When you think about a time when maybe you've made a decision based on your connection with God and vision and His calling. And compare that to a time where maybe you made a decision based out of frustration and exhaustion. Think about how different those two times are. If you go to God early in the process, before you're frustrated and tired, usually those decisions are based on powerful truths, on true wisdom. When you make a decision based, out of your frustration, usually you don't make the good choice. Usually you will trade a short-term gain for a long-term gain. Think about, something as simple as responding to a text, right? Somebody sends you something and you're frustrated and whatever, and so you respond to that text, and usually you do it and it's not good, right? It just makes the problem worse. Think of that instead of, when you respond out of a time of prayer, at a time where you've sharpened the saw, and early in the process, you get God's input. Usually your response is going to be so much more Christ-like, so much more wise. And so going to God early, that's what this chapter 12, the beginning of chapter 12, really focuses on. It applies to young and old. Because, there's some who are probably watching who, maybe you're up in years, you don't have as much energy as when you're young, but on the flip side, you don't have the same responsibilities. Your kids are out of the house, maybe you're retired. You may have some of the most spiritually exciting and effective years of your life, but you need to sharpen your spiritual tools. You need to get going and connecting with God early, getting His power and purpose in your day, in your week, even if you're towards the end of life. But if you're still young, don't wait to live a life of impact. Don't be stuffing your face with vain things. That's what the writer of Ecclesiastes says, because we don't know what tomorrow holds. We may never get to be old. And if that's the case, then we will have not lived an effective and wise way. So better live wisely with years of effectiveness. So wherever, I think the main thrust here is wherever we are in life, young or old or whatever task, go to God while the day you have is young. Okay, while the task you have is just beginning. Don't wait to go towards the end, because then we'll more likely to have burnout and frustration instead of being infused with God's power, his purpose, in his perspective, in that day, in that task. Now, another way to avoid frustration and burnout is to pay attention to the desires that God has put in your heart and pursue them. One of the reasons that another reason why some people get burnt out is they're stuck doing things that they don't like, that don't match their gifting. But the things that we do like, the things that God has gifted us with, and usually give us energy instead of taking energy away from us and sapping our energy. Again, we're going to look at another verse, chapter 11 of Ecclesiastes, verse 9, says this: "Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and the sight of your eyes. But know that all of these things God will bring you into judgment." And what's interesting here is we need to make sure that a part of what we do, like we pay attention, walk in the ways of our heart. Now, you might say, well, other parts of Scripture say, our heart's desperately wicked and we shouldn't follow it. Well, there's, again, we have to take both sides of this, that yes, without God, we're led astray, but also that God has made us, that we need to make sure that a part of what we do, if we're connecting with God, is enjoyable. It's energy restoring. Otherwise, we may burn out. And I think here Ecclesiastes is saying, while you're young, yes, do sharpen your saw early with God. Get God involved early in the process. But another way to be effective and to enjoy life is to do those things that God has made you to enjoy. We're all different. We all have different personalities. So what recharges your batteries? Are they 9-volt or double A? Well, for me, I like to play basketball. It helps me get exercise and all that, but I haven't been able to do that in this pandemic. And so that's a difficult thing. I need to find something else, like going on hikes and stuff, because I understand that if I don't do something that I enjoy every now and again, that the energy meter really goes down. And that if I want to avoid burnout and frustration, I've got to pay attention to those things that God has placed in me that give me energy. And it's important to work some of those energy-giving things into your life, into your day. Even though they might take more time and you've got a lot to do, if you're less frustrated and less fatigued because of these things, you'll end up in the long run being more effective. This concept also applies to church work. Many churches, and unfortunately this includes ours, and we're trying to move away from this, is that we have certain positions to fill, right? Certain committees, and we just ask people to volunteer, not based on the people's desire and their gifting, but based on our needs, based on the fact that, we have an open position. So people are stuck doing things that they may not care about. They may not have a passion to do, but yet they're doing it out of a sense of obligation. And that doesn't lead to long-term effectiveness and where we're full of energy. It often leads to people being burnt out on church work. Like, I've done my time, I've paid my nickel. Someone else can do it. No, this is why part of our vision at our church is to, as we grow Christ followers, is to do that by equipping believers to use their spiritual gifts, to understand their spiritual gifts and their abilities, the way God has made them, the personality he's given them, and then fitting them into a place that they actually fit so that we thrive and that we're actually doing different ministries and serving in ways that give us great enjoyment and give us energy instead of sap our energy. But oftentimes the way we're structured, it just causes us to force people into different positions. And that's not healthy, and it's also not wise. Just an example. If I was in children's ministry, I would be burnt out in about a year if that's what I did full time. Why? Well, because that's just not my gifting. I don't work well with children. My gifts, my personality are not geared that way. It would take a great deal of my energy. It would sap me. Um, but there are people who are the opposite, who love children and they're passionate about it. They enjoy working with children and they're good at it. And it's almost like the children give them energy. And and that's the thing, is that God has made us with different gifts, different abilities, different personalities, so that we need one another. Because I know that our children need to be ministered to. They need to be brought up and given instruction in a way that they can understand. And so I know that I need in my life and in my church people who can do that. And so being a body is being interdependent. And, and we are wise when we pay attention to that. And again, so for me, that means I've never really been a children's minister. I've done church planting, I've done collegiate ministry and pastoring, of course, but not children's ministry. And again, why? Well, because I know how God has made me. I know his calling on my life. But I also know that we need to find people who are good at that. So I think of our Awana volunteers, others that work with the children, and I'm so grateful for them and how God has specifically made them different so that, again, when they're around kids, they pull the energy from the kids. But for me, those kids pull the energy away from me. And so I think as we think about as being a church, we should be a church that has a system where we value volunteers. We value how God has made them different, and we find a ministry that fits with them instead of sort of forcing them into a position that needs filling. But that all goes on the concept of what we just saw here. Rejoice, O young man, chapter 11, verse 9. Walk in the ways of your heart in the sight of your eyes, right? But know that God will bring you into judgment for all of these things, meaning that, okay, following your eyes doesn't mean doing whatever you want, but it just means understanding that God has made us each different. All right, so we've hit a lot of different things, and you're like, wow, this is different than a lot of the other studies of Ecclesiastes. And again, the reason for that is that these last couple of chapters is a lot. Ecclesiastes goes into this thing where it's a lot like Proverbs. It gives us some snippets of wisdom, and I've kind of pulled these three together that all have to do with life is too short not to be effective. It's too short to be exhausted and burned out, and so live accordingly. And what does that mean? It means live in a way that you enjoy life, that you're effective with life. Again, chapter 11, verses 7 through 8 says, "Light is sweet, and it is pleasant for the eyes to see the sun. So if a person lives many years, let him rejoice in them all. But let him remember that the days of darkness will be many." Again, so that, especially knowing that, as Ecclesiastes always talks about, the days can be dark and that life is futile apart from God. There's going to be difficult days, especially because of that. Live in a way where you can enjoy life and be effective. And then it gives us these precepts of how to do that. And again, it's a lot easier to enjoy life, to rejoice in the years that God gives you when you're living wisely. It's hard to rejoice when you're exhausted, when you're frustrated, when you're about burnt out. That's why we need to follow these precepts. So yes, we need to work hard in life, but we also need to work wisely by, as it says, sharpening life's axe, by sharpening the saw. And we need this in all areas of life, but especially we need it spiritually. We especially need, because again, we don't just have our own strength. We have the Spirit's strength. We need to put ourselves in the path of the Spirit so that we receive a spiritual sharpening to be effective in what God puts before us. But before we're at the end of our rope, while we still have energy, while we still have fresh perspective, we need to set aside time to be better prepared for the next week, the next part of life, the next task we have. Again, whatever that means, whether that means getting formal training, means being a better planner. I want you to ask yourself right now, what do I need to do to sharpen my axe so that I'm more effective? And as we pray Maybe that's what you need to think and ask God, God, what do I need to do to sharpen my axe? How have I been living in a way that does not um, give me that time and set aside that time to really receive the sharpening of the Lord? Because again, living wisely, it also means not just setting aside time early in a task. It also means paying attention to the way that God has made you. What do you like? What gives you energy? Do those things if possible. And if possible, do them for the Lord. Oftentimes your passions and your skills, some of us think, well, no, that's what I do for my job, and I do something else for the Lord. It's supposed to not be enjoyable. No. God has given you these things, and he's probably given them to you not just so that you'll have a career and to provide for you, but to also provide for his body, so that you'll enjoy uh, how you serve him, and it won't be drudgery. So let's start incorporating this wisdom today, not tomorrow. Life's too short, and often it's too frustrating to not be effective and blessed. Again, God doesn't want you to be burnt out. He doesn't want you to be used up. Jesus wants to fill you with his Spirit, so rivers of living water will flow in you and through you, and you'll be blessed and effective in all areas of your life. But I think the question is, are you sharpening the saw? Are you putting yourself in that place where you can receive all that God has you? Are you wisely gauging what you're doing every day early in the process? Not waiting till you're done, but early in the process, engaging God. And are you reflecting on how God has made you and the gifts that you have, knowing that God is not just the God of the miraculous aha, but also he's the God who formed you in your mother's womb. And so your gifts, your talents, your experiences, they also have been given to you so that you can live wisely and enjoy life as you enjoy serving God.